Well, as folks are filtering in, we'd like to welcome you to Experiential Learning Week. I'm Shauna Reilly, the Director of the Institute for Student Research and Creative Activity here at NKU. We have a full week lined up for you, each day showcasing a different type of experiential learning. Today, we're going to start with our keynote speaker, which is why you're all here. And then we have a panel this afternoon on a unique study abroad exchange program. Tuesday, we'll look at internships and practicums with 4 panels stemming from Chase Legal Clinics to a simulation of medical emergencies in our simulation center, to a panel with internship advisors, and finally, the opportunity to talk with interns themselves about what they've experienced this past semester. Wednesday is our celebration of student research and creative activity, where we'll showcase more than 200 projects from our students and have 2 live panels with faculty and students talking about their experiences this year. There's also pre-recorded presentations from the School of the Arts on our website. Thursday, we'll focus on NKU in the community by looking at service learning. First, we have a panel looking at different legal clinics where NKU law students give back to their communities. And second, a panel of our nationally known Mayerson program, where we'll hear from students, faculty, and community partners about their philanthropic program. Finally, we wrap up the week with career services on Friday, where we learn how to put these activities on our resumes. I encourage you to visit our website at www.nku.edu/ELW to see more pre-recorded content and highlights. We've involved a great number of faculty and students in developing our programs and videos this week. I want to take the time to acknowledge their work and contributions, and I hope you'll join us for the rest of the week in these panels. I also want to take the time to acknowledge our sponsors who made this event possible, and in particular, the Vice Provost for Graduate Education, Research and Outreach for sponsoring today's presentation. Now, for the reason we're all here, our today's speaker is Dr. Jenny Shanahan, who is the Assistant Provost for High Impact Practices at Bridgewater State University, where she leads undergraduate research, the honors program, national fellowships, and the apprentice programs. She's highly published on her work in engaging students in these experiential learning practices. Further, she's committed to racial and social justice in higher education and works to create equitable access to experiential learning opportunities. She has a PhD in literature and has been active in the Council for Undergraduate Research in their Arts and Humanities Division. After we've heard remarks from Dr. Shanahan, there'll be an opportunity for questions from the audience. There's a box at the bottom of your screen to submit questions throughout the presentation. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Shanahan.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome, Dr. Reilly, and welcome to all the students and other members of the NKU community. I'm so pleased to get to join you through the wonders of Zoom. And I'm going to talk today about experiential learning opportunities, but expressly within the context that we're all experiencing, because it's created changes throughout everything that we're doing, obviously. I'd like to start my talk acknowledging the difficulties and many of the losses that we've experienced in the last 14 months. You all are supposed to be in person for Experiential Learning Week. You're supposed to have a keynote speaker who's there with you, maybe sitting down for lunch at the end of the talk across the table from you. And I have been reflecting on how many times I have said, and I'm sure you have said, supposed to, since March of 2020. How many times something did not go as planned or expected. And that phrase, supposed to, implies loss, because there's a gap between what we expected to happen and what is happening. And I'll make the case in this talk that in that gap is also hope and is also creative thinking between what we expected and what is. But I think it's important to take a moment just to acknowledge the fact that there's been a lot of difficulty that we've all been through. I think of those of you who are first year students. You were supposed to have graduation celebrations last summer. It supposed to have been a great end to your K through 12 education with prom and sports competitions and music, senior music shows, all kinds of things that you missed out on. And then you're supposed to be learning in person. And I know some of you are living on campus, but so much more of the community that you had looked forward to in becoming new college students. And sometimes that gap between what is and what we expected is more like a chasm. And that's when we've lost someone we love, either to COVID-19 or some other cause. Because in this last year, those who've lost their loved ones, even when it was not pandemic related, couldn't gather for funerals and get together in the ways that we usually do to support each other in grief. The first significant loss I had in my life was my father, who died about 11 years ago. And I was so moved by how many people surrounded our family with care and stopped by the house and brought us meals and gave us hugs. And to think of not having that when you're going through a very difficult period of grief is heart-wrenching. My friend who lost her spouse said, we were supposed to grow old together. And I have a graduate student who's getting married this summer, and she lost her father to COVID. And she said, he was supposed to walk me down the aisle this summer at my wedding. And those losses are weighing heavily on us, whether they're those significant ones of losing a loved one, or maybe they seem smaller in comparison, but they've accumulated, the times that you didn't get to take the trip you planned, or the time with your family or friends that you had really been looking forward to. And that's important. It has shaped us. So if you if you'd indulge me in just taking a moment of silence, if you are a prayer, you could offer a prayer just to acknowledge those we've lost in the last year. Anyone that you want to call to mind who you know, or maybe just an offering of empathy and compassion to those around the country and around the world who've suffered loss. Just take a moment. Thank you. So, in honoring our context, what I'm saying is that all of that is not past. It's part of our current situation, not only because the pandemic isn't over, but because we're living with these effects in every part of our educational and other parts of our lives. I read an article in the Atlantic magazine 2 weeks ago that described how our brains have changed in the last year. And of course, when our brains change, our whole personalities change. One of the statistics cited in that article is that depression and anxiety rates have quadrupled in just the past year. And I heard an NPR story last week where they interviewed college professors, and 9 out of 10 college professors reported that they are concerned about their students' mental health. And 9 out of 10, I thought, well, the 10th professor is probably just not paying attention, because I think everybody I know who works in higher ed is very concerned about the mental health of our students, because we're all different people than we were a year ago because of this. And it's not just the pandemic. I'm going to share my slides with you. We've had a great deal of change in our lives in the last year that have affected us. A key moment, of course, was the murder of George Floyd over Memorial Weekend in 2020. And the fact that most of us saw that video over and over again, and then again in the last few weeks with the trial, it affected us socially. There's a trauma that gets spread across the country and really the world as people saw that and experienced that. And then, of course, with the verdict last week, all the tensions, like awaiting that, and then maybe some release, but maybe not enough. And I want to acknowledge that my colleagues and my students who are Black and Brown Americans suffering that trauma very acutely from this last year. And then many of you probably joined protests or demonstrations. There were, more people involved in that last summer than ever before, and some of those were beautiful. I participated in one in my hometown, and I live in Massachusetts, and it was really deeply moving, and it was peaceful and very affirming. And in other places, there was violence between protesters and police or demonstrators and police. And so all of this contributed, I think, to the overall stress in our country. And then we had the most partisan and most divided presidential election than we've had ever in our history, or at least in our lifetimes. And many people I know, including me, we have people in our families that were completely, we don't just disagree anymore, but we don't agree on the same facts. And so we're coming from such different places that it can be a strain on those relationships, to say the least. So all of that is to acknowledge that we have been through a lot, and neuroscientists have studied how our cognitive function has been affected, especially in the last year. They say that it's three main areas that have been affected. One is executive functioning or executive decision making. So those high level discernments and decisions you have to make in your life. The second is memory. And the third is how we learn, how we can learn and retain information. And of course, decision making, memory, and learning are pretty central to being college students and college faculty and staff. So this is definitely felt right in our lives. The neuroscientists say that these 5 areas are the most to blame for these changes. One is, of course, the trauma that can be experienced through loss, but also can be triggered at a remove. So even seeing violence on your television or computer screen can result in that stress on the body and in the brain. On the other end of the spectrum, having long periods of boredom isn't good for us. And scientists say that the stress that we've experienced in the last year, particularly what they call microdoses of unexpected stress. So that's when you don't know it's coming and you're suddenly confronted with it, and that there's that surge of adrenaline. That has happened so many times in the last year that we have our brains, our bodies have really taken a beating. Although some people have become more fit during the pandemic, the vast majority of us have had less activity. So that means less of the oxygenated blood that's getting to our brains and really priming us for learning and memory. And finally, of course, grief. And the grief of losing loved ones, but also the grief of losing opportunities and things that you were looking forward to. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's not only the worst kinds of grief that affect you. It's any of that accumulating all over time. And that's the bad news, that we've changed because our brains are reacting and responding to all of this. But the good news is that our brains change, that what we know as brain plasticity means that we can generate those new neural connections, and we can learn new things by changing some of these conditions. And we're seeing some of that lifting, right, with more people getting vaccinated, with the warmer weather. So maybe more physical activity. Novelty, just referring to having new experiences or experiences that you haven't had in a while, and maybe you'll appreciate them more than ever. Environmental enrichment refers to not just getting out in nature, which is really good for you. There's been all kinds of research to demonstrate that time in nature increases your capacity for creative problem solving, for example. But also your indoor space can be enriched with by listening to music that you enjoy, by hanging artwork that brings you joy, by bringing in some fresh flowers, perhaps in your workspace. The social interactions that we've lost through in-person opportunities the last year really need to be nurtured even when they have to be remote. And the kinds of things we're doing right now um, leads to Zoom fatigue, right? You've had all these online courses and meetings and seminars through the video space. But what the scientists are talking about are even through your screen, through Zoom, through FaceTime, having those connections with your friends is really beneficial. So I recently went to a high school reunion in Zoom, and I thought about not going. It just didn't seem like something that sounded like very much fun. And I ended up having a wonderful experience. I actually stayed on for 4 hours because it was so great to connect with people I hadn't seen in a long time. And finally, opportunities that allow you to use your learning edge, which means that you are being engaged and challenged at the right level. And the right level is it's kind of stretching you and giving you that motivation to succeed, but it's not totally overwhelming you. So that's that edge. You don't want it to be something that sends you into utter stress, but that engages you and allows you to learn new things. And I think experiential learning opportunities contribute to all of this. You know, they certainly are providing a learning edge for us and those social interactions and getting us out into novel or new experiences. So that's where I'm deriving hope at this time. I'm deriving especially hope from my students and students like you. I just feel such pride in our young adults especially, but also post-traditional age students who in the most challenging circumstances are choosing to continue their education. That is a tremendously hopeful act. And none of us who are alive now, certainly not in our careers, have experienced anything in our educational lives that's like what we've been through the last 14 months or so. So the fact that you're persisting despite these very real challenges is a great source of hope. Um, I wonder if you um, think about those times, or sorry, those opportunities where you feel really hopeful. Maybe you've been vaccinated, or your parents have, or you have some plans for this summer that actually might be able to be fulfilled because maybe it's getting safer to get together and to travel and all of that stuff. So I derive hope from all of those places. It's also springtime in the Northern Hemisphere. So all of us who are enjoying the real and metaphoric new life and renewal and hope that comes from things growing again. And for those who are Christian, this is the Easter season. For those who are Muslim, this is Ramadan. So these millions and even billions of people around the world are experiencing the holiest times of the year. And I find that a very hopeful sign as well. So all of these things I've been reflecting on. I have a son who's a first year college student. So I have a special place in my heart for all of you who are in your first year. But if you are, say, 19 years old or that, or right around there, like my son, you were born right after 9/11. And then those of you who are a little bit older, you were infants, toddlers, maybe preschoolers at the time of our country's greatest trauma of our generation or of our lifetimes. And you might not have any conscious memory of it. but it was certainly a shockwave through your families, through, the people who were caring for you, the people who were connected in your life, that undoubtedly had some kind of subconscious effect on you. And I find it very intriguing that your generation then is emerging into the next phase of your life, adulthood, college, launching your career, forming your adult relationships and friendships during a time of another national and global trauma of the pandemic. And I actually, this might seem like a funny example for hope, but I actually see this as quite beautiful, because I think that you're a generation that's very special, and you are shaped by these events at formative times of your life that will undoubtedly increase your compassion. And we know that it has increased your ability to be creative, to be flexible, to pivot, a word that we've overused, but certainly captures it, of the last 14 months or so. One person who knows a lot about hope in the face of difficulty was Viktor Frankl. His quotation here is from his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. "The one thing you can't take away from me is the way I choose to respond." So Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Austria who was a Holocaust survivor. So he lived in 4 different Nazi concentration camps before he was liberated. But in that time that he was in those camps, he lost everyone in his family. So first his father, then his mother, his brother, and his wife. Everyone close to him was killed by the Nazis. And after liberation, Viktor Frankl, with his psychiatrist training, wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, that's widely considered one of the most important books of the 20th century, about how to make meaning in a time of suffering and loss. And Frankl's point was that you don't have to go through a Holocaust to need this. Any time of suffering, of loss in your life, you're going to be searching for meaning. And he came up with this idea of logotherapy, where we can make meaning out of that loss by 3 things: making a difference in the world, engaging in meaningful experiences and relationships, and adopting an attitude of freedom during unavoidable suffering. And what Frankl meant by that last piece is that all of us can choose how we respond in a situation. And that's the thing no one can take away from us. And he talked about unavoidable suffering, things that are out of your control, like a global pandemic and all the repercussions of that. So, how do you choose to respond can help you make meaning and help you find joy again and throughout the rest of your life. And I wanted to share a couple of examples of how his wisdom is inspiring people to make change out of loss. One is Amy Vitale. I saw a CBS Sunday morning show about her and was so inspired. She's a National Geographic photographer, and she usually traveled 350 days of the year internationally. Amy Vitale's passion and vocation was to photograph and make especially people in the Western world, aware of endangered species and threatened species, and the ways in which their habitat was threatened, and the ways in which certain poaching and hunting practices were threatening their existence. And her focus has been especially on the northern white rhino. And the photo on the top left there of the man with the rhino, that rhino was the last male of the species. So a desperate situation for the continuation of this animal. That photo of Amy Vitale is from her Instagram page. I don't know if you can see it, but she's holding up her camera because she's in chest high water. So she's very adventurous and takes on all kinds of causes, especially on the continent of Africa. So imagine the pandemic hits, can't travel, all of her work is at a standstill, and she's feeling like it's such a desperate situation and I can't get the word out and I can't continue this. And she was in a period of despair. That's great loss. And what she did was turn to what she could focus on in a very Frankel way. She chose how to respond. Amy Vitale's home base is Montana, a place and in a country in which we do have threatened species and threatened habitat. And so she turned her camera there. These are just two examples that I love of her photographs of Montana. If you follow her on Instagram, you can see just stunning work where she has now, for the last year, been chronicling sensitive habitat and animals that may be threatened in her own area and in this country to raise our awareness of it. Another example of this response came in not just one student, but I'll highlight one student, but I would say in all of the students I've had the pleasure of getting to work with, especially during the pandemic. Abby Smargon is a student at Bridgewater State University. We're in Massachusetts, about 25 miles south of Boston. Abby is going to present on Wednesday this week at Posters on the Hill. Posters on the Hill is usually in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Capitol building. And it's where 60 students from around the country share their research with legislators, with legislative staffers, with nonprofit agencies that are based in DC. And of course, this year's will be virtual. She's going to be sharing her research via Zoom. But her story is why she was selected. Abby is a social work major, but she suffered from depression, or does, but especially in high school, where she had some experiences of feeling suicidal at times even. And she's gotten help and she's much stronger. And so she started to work with the Shine Initiative. She's been now working with them for 6 years. It's a nonprofit that works with youth about mental health and seeks to remove the stigma about depression and anxiety so that especially middle and high school students will talk openly with trusted adults in their lives, whether that's family members or teachers, coaches, about suicidality or wanting to hurt themselves in some way. And also educating teachers and parents about responsive ways that they can work with kids who are in this situation. So when the pandemic hit and everything shuts down and we're going to remote learning and people are moving out of residence halls and everything, as the Atlantic article said, depression and anxiety rates quadrupled. Abby was very concerned about the precarious mental health of many of her peers. So what she chose to do was an undergraduate research project aimed to help her peers. And she studied the mental health of Bridgewater State University students last spring and summer, and asked them about, used a depression and anxiety scale, and also asked them about what they know about the resources available to them, whether they access those resources, why they do, why they don't. And she's been able to produce an article that teaches the rest of us in higher ed about how we can do better, how we can help our students who are suffering from mental health issues, especially during a remote learning period. So this was such a powerful example, I thought, of using the suffering that's there, the loss that's there, choosing to do something with it, to make meaning out of it, and to serve other people as she did so. I feel, as I said, very hopeful about your generation. I've heard somebody say that you're going to be called Generation P for pandemic, which I hope not. But the idea is that you are shaped by the pandemic, And I would argue, and many researchers have, long before this pandemic hit. You are a generation that researchers have said are the most committed to anti-racism and social justice in history. You are the most inclusive of LGBTQ plus people. You're also a generation that has helped to destigmatize mental illness and mood disorders, just as Abby Smargon has. You're much more open about those things than in previous generations. My mother suffered from a mental health disorder, and that was taboo in our family. And of course, that has continued through generations. But your generation is shedding more light on that, and that's going to save people's lives. You're also a generation related to that values neurodiversity. You're the first generation in the US to go through school with inclusive classrooms in all of your education. So you have friends who are on the spectrum. You yourselves may be on the spectrum. You understand that there's a whole spectrum as well of attention and sociability, that that kind of neurodiversity is just part of your world, and so that you understand and welcome that. And finally, you traditional age undergrads are doing the most about mitigating the climate crisis, of really prioritizing the health of the planet and its beings, more than people who are older than you anyway, typically. So those are tremendous traits of this generation that's becoming young adults at this time. I had the privilege, honor really, of getting to interview Jennifer Toyo, who's an NKU alum. She graduated last May. She majored in biology at NKU and did undergraduate research in neuroscience with Dr. Williamson. And she's a great example of what NKU offers you in terms of experiential learning and those opportunities, and then in the early part of what she's doing with that, right? So the opportunity that came her way for this year that ends in July is to be an AmeriCorps volunteer and to work with NKU Rocks, which I'm guessing you're familiar with, but it is a program for African-American students in their first year. And she's doing that on this AmeriCorps Vista volunteer opportunity, community engaged, serving other people. And then we'll be moving into a PhD prep fellowship, which will give her access to PhD program in biomedical research. And she's hoping to have a career in advancing the research into diseases and preventing disease. And I said, I'm so grateful because, you know, we've got multiple vaccines that seem to be very effective because of fantastic biomedical research. And it's very gratifying to know that there's a new generation of these biomedical researchers coming down the pike to help advance research for perhaps what is the next novel virus, and what we will need as people retire and move on. We'll need this whole cadre of biomedical researchers. So so pleased to know that Jennifer's in that pipeline. But she, through her research and now through her service and her community interaction with NKU Rocks, is developing the very skills, the very traits that are going to propel her career. I have no doubt that she's going to achieve these goals. Every 2 years, there's a major survey reported by the AACNU. AACNU is the Association of American Colleges and Universities. They do a survey of thousands of employers and hiring managers, and their 2021 report just came out 2 weeks ago. This was the headline: completion of active and applied learning experiences gives job applicants a clear advantage. So active and applied learning experiences means experiential learning. um, Without a doubt, these employers are saying, we need recent college grads, we need interns, and then we need grads who can do these things, who can be globally engaged, community engaged, who can research, who can um, who've had internships or co-ops and have had that work experience. I don't know if you know that even before the pandemic, we had a problem of underemployment for recent college graduates. So the unemployment rate was very low before the pandemic. The overall national unemployment rate and the regional unemployment rates were, in most cases, in the single digits and even low single digits. But the underemployment rate for recent college graduates, what they were saying, people up to age, say, 28 who had a bachelor's degree, that about half of them were either unemployed or most underemployed. And what underemployed means is either they can't find full-time work and they want to because they don't have benefits and things like that, and they need the higher salary. Or, and I'm sure you know people like this, you might be some of them, they're patching together 2 or 3 or more part-time jobs or gigs. So they're, doing Grubhub and working at a coffee shop and, piecing it together, which is not sustainable, especially when you're paying back student loans and, trying to make it on your own. So that was the situation before 2020. And then, as you know, as some businesses very sadly won't be able to reopen, or at least not for a long time. We're going to have this depression, or at least this recession for the near future. And I don't have to tell those of you who are looking for jobs, maybe those of you who are graduating seniors, who are really hoping for that first step of your career, that it's very tough. So what are the ways that you can prepare yourself as well as possible and be as ready as you can possibly be for whatever opportunities there are? And in this AAC News survey, we see once again in 2021, like we did in 2019, 2017, 2015, but that involving yourself in these experiential learning opportunities is the best possible way. 9 out of 10 employers said they're more likely to hire a recent college graduate with those learning experiences. So to distinguish yourself, to get yourself an interview, you need these opportunities, these experiences on your resume. And it's not just for your future. There's mountains of evidence to demonstrate that it enriches your time while you're a student as well. Students across the country say that that was the best thing they did. If they studied abroad, if they had an internship, if they did undergraduate research, if they did service learning, community engagement, that was the best thing I did. And they'll often tell younger students or students who are on their way to college, you've got to do it because it really made a difference for me. Jennifer Toyo said that to me as well. So I'm so glad I did research because that helped me see what kind of career I wanted. In that survey, the employers identified the most important skills and the most important traits or dispositions that they wanted to see. And they're saying you can demonstrate these best through experiential learning. So their top one was ability to work in teams. And you've probably been hearing that for a long time. And one of the employers who was interviewed said, lots of people put on their cover letter or their resume ability to work in teams, but they don't really have deep experience. We want to see that you were in an internship that was a team, that you did service learning on a team, that you did research in a lab group or with a team of other student researchers. We want to see evidence of this, and that is going to get our attention. Critical thinking is a difficult thing to put your finger on. It's supposed to be what you get out of a college education. But then you can think about in your experiential learning, where are the times when you really made distinct choices about problem solving or decision discernment of difficult things. The ability to analyze and interpret data is in the top 5 for the first time in 2021. So think about that in terms of your research, internship work, et cetera. The application of knowledge in real world settings is really the definition of experiential learning. And then digital literacy showed up there for the first time in the top 5. And I thought, well, one of the silver linings of this pandemic is that you all have had a great deal of experience with digital communications, both through video platforms, but also the sharing of ideas and documents and data in the digital space. So highlight that for your future employers. In terms of the traits or the personal dispositions, I put these in the black and white part of the slide, just in case the contrast on the graphic isn't readable. These are just the traits that at least 50% of the employers in the survey said were the most important. So they could select, I think, 3 that they considered most important. The drive or work ethic that you can demonstrate by taking on experiential learning along with your classroom learning, perhaps with your part-time job or jobs too. That demonstrates something about you that employers want. Your ability to take initiative is right up there with that. Self-confidence, that gets developed. It's not ego, it's an inner strength and confidence that comes from having those experiences, from getting to share your work at a campus symposium, for example. Your persistence, continuing through during a pandemic, during times of difficulty. Your self-awareness, which is developed, especially I would say in these areas in service learning and community engagement, in which the reflection on your own learning and your own role and position in the work is a major part of the work itself. Your resilience or ability to bounce back or get through difficult times, your leadership skills that are developed in these. Your connection with the workplace is referring to students who've had an internship or a co-op with a company. So they already have a relationship and they know the values and the norms of that company or that workplace. Your empathy that you can demonstrate through your service, you can demonstrate through global engagement, that you're seeking to create connections across culture. And finally, having a curiosity for lifelong learning. That you didn't just go through college and check off the boxes and meet all the requirements and get your degree, but that you really immersed yourself in a curious way in your opportunities. So experiential learning involve these 4 areas, especially that we've been talking about, or that is the focus of your week. That's where you can really apply this knowledge to real world settings. And the first thing that has come up in my conversations with students of the last year is, well, how can I study abroad? I can't, it's still, most countries in the world are not accepting Americans. We don't know what's going to happen even next fall. I took this photo from the website of your own study abroad office, I think, because it particularly appealed to me because I'm Irish American and I've been wanting to get to Ireland so badly. And so I thought, yeah, there's another reminder of how long it's going to be till I get to Ireland. But really what employers are looking for and what changes a person doesn't depend entirely on physically going there. What it depends on is an attitude of global engagement. And what we mean by global engagement is a mindset more than the physical change of geography. There have been articles about American students who've gone abroad and really blown the opportunity because all they did was hang out with other Americans, or they spent a lot of time drinking, or not, in other words, not immersing themselves in the opportunity. So it's not just the physical travel, it's the mindset of engaging with people across cultures. And you can do that right there at NKU. You can have a double major or a minor in an area of international studies. So these were some that I pulled off of your offerings at NKU. Asian studies, Celtic, Chinese, Latin American and Caribbean, Middle Eastern and North African, Native American studies, Sub-Saharan African studies. These are ways where you gain the expertise. Through those courses, you're also demonstrating a desire to connect with and understand cultures beyond your own, and places outside of this country. And in the case of Native American studies, an underserved and understudied area in your own country. The other way you can demonstrate global engagement is through language study. Language study is also not just literal, like, oh, I can communicate with someone who speaks a language other than English, but it demonstrates your desire to have cross-cultural communication. And you know, through any language course you've had, whether in high school or in college, that you're learning culture as you learn language. That's a key part of any kind of language study. You learn about food and family structures and traditions and celebrations and all of that as you're learning the language. It also allows you to learn how to express ideas in distinct ways. So translating from one language to another is an art. It's not, the best translations are not just literal word for word. The best translations are ones that try to seek the meaning of something in its broader context and relate that across in the other language. I was talking a little bit with Jennifer Toyo about this. I didn't necessarily expect to, but she was saying that she was born in and grew up in Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and grew up speaking grew up speaking French, and studied Spanish in high school, and then was able to study abroad in high school, which is amazing, in Spain. But then at NKU, Jennifer took some Spanish classes, including medical Spanish. And so she's literally better able to serve in her future career because of that learning of this other language. And for her, she already had at least 2 languages and a little bit of her dad's local language from Togo. But learning how to apply this knowledge in different contexts is tremendously valuable. It's not just about how are you going to literally use the language. Another area of experiential learning that's taken a hit in the pandemic is service learning. I included a photo of a group of volunteers and then the girls from Girls Inc. with whom they worked, because this is often what we think of with service learning and with community engagement, that we are together in a place doing work together, really fostering those interpersonal connections. And when it's not safe to do that, what are your options? And very much like global engagement doesn't mean physical travel, community engagement doesn't have to mean physically being in the same space, especially when it's not safe to be there. It's a way of changing your mindset to care about this broader community. I was so moved by this message on the NKU website about the Meyerson Student Philanthropy Project. I'm just going to read part of it to you because I thought it captured this beautifully. A classroom approach that relies on community interaction is tested when that interaction is by Zoom, Teams, and Google Hangout. Yet something important happened in our fall classes. At a time when students were feeling disconnected, student philanthropy brought extra value to the virtual classroom. One professor noted that his students' reflection essays talked about being lonely. The student philanthropy component of his class made them feel less so. Students felt connected to each other, to the nonprofits they consider, to their community, to common purpose. So these courses that are Mayerston Student Philanthropy Project courses are actually um, helping your students, helping you as students, perhaps as much as it is giving back to these community organizations that you're working with. And then one of the professors, this was also on the website, said, I tried to underline the key parts here. Had we been in a face-to-face class, the students would have never thought to request permission to record and share the interview. It was a powerful learning moment that would not have occurred if not for our unique learning environment. And I thought, what powerful thing for you who are going to be college grads soon to be able to say to potential employers that this is the creative way that I and my classmates or my collaborators were able to overcome the challenges posed by remote learning or posed by the pandemic. And this piece right here from that quotation, a powerful learning moment that would not have occurred if not for our unique learning environment. I'll invite you to reflect on those, to highlight those in your cover letters for jobs, because we are going to need a workforce and people in careers who know how to do this. There, I don't want to say it, but there could be another pandemic. But even if there's not another pandemic, we have climate emergencies. We have some of the most powerful floods and storms that we've ever had. In a recent storm in my area, we lost power for 4 days. So there are going to be times when we're going to need to pivot again. And if you're already someone who sees those possibilities and has done something creative with them, you're going to be golden. We're going to need you in all kinds of industries and nonprofits. I wanted to share with you an example of community engagement that has really been powerful in my life this last semester. At Bridgewater State University, we have something called Senior College, and it is an opportunity for older adults to take college courses at very low cost and with no papers or tests or grades. So the best of getting to learn something that they're interested in. The average age of our senior college students is 76. So these are people, for the most part, many years, in some cases, past retirement from their work. Many of them are grandparents and great-grandparents. And during the pandemic, that community of our older adults was perhaps the most isolated because they were the most vulnerable to the virus, right? To getting very ill or dying from COVID-19. And having senior college courses by Zoom was a lifeline for so many of these folks. We have about 260 students who participate in our senior college. They were just saying that they needed that connection so much. So I've been working, as Dr. Reilly said in her introduction, I've been working on racial justice in higher education and been spending a lot of this past year on racial equity at my own institution on a racial justice task force. So I was asked if I would teach a course about this work. And I did this semester. It was called Becoming Anti-Racist. And I taught it for the senior college. And I thought, I don't know if anyone's going to sign up for it. Usually a senior college course gets about 20 students. Some are small, intimate courses of 7 to 10 students. 52 students took this course this semester. We just had our last class meeting last week. It was tremendously powerful. I asked the students on the first day, 52 of them, what prompted them to take this class. And they put it in the chat in Zoom. I pulled my favorite answers here, and I just wanted to share them with you. To be more mindful in my interactions. I want to raise awareness, my own and other people's. I want to be someone who makes a difference. I've been raised in a racist society, so I don't know what I don't know. I think I have offended people in the past without meaning to. I don't want to do that again. And this was a student who also said she didn't know the word microaggression before the class, and then said, "Oh, I think I've done microaggressions and I don't want to anymore." So it's so moving. And then racism is the biggest problem we have. We have to try to solve it. So these are folks who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. I have two students, one who's a mother in her 90s, and then her daughter in her 70s were both in the class. They wanted to make changes in their spheres of influence. They have relationships, they have interactions in public and in private that they wanted to make more just. And so they took a class on anti-racism to do that. And it was amazing. They told me that they felt we just scratched the surface this semester, and that's true. And they convinced me to teach part 2 in the fall. And so part 2 in the fall, we're going to do a racial equity in practice class for any one of these students who wants to continue the work. So I'm just so heartened by that. Internships and co-ops are a very powerful form of experiential learning. This is a photo of a group of interns with the Washington Center, which is a national internship program in Washington, D.C. That, of course, has been completely changed as a result of the pandemic. And one of the, or I should say, two of the developments in co-ops and internships that have been exciting during this time are actually opening up this opportunity to more students. The first is micro internships. Those are sometimes I've seen 10 to 40 hour internships. So you've got one project, and it could be kind of like a gig internship where you just do that project. Great opportunity for students who work a lot of hours, just cannot fit in a semester long or more involved internship or co-op, but still get you really clear something that you can exhibit, in other words, of your professional experience, and get you connected to a company. And then the remote work that all of us saw as a barrier, I should say most of us saw as a barrier, has opened up internships in other parts of the country in ways that we didn't expect. And just as a lot of workers in their professional careers are finding, hey, I can actually do this pretty well if I have a decent Wi-Fi connection, they're realizing that their interns can join them remotely as well. So I know that your internship and co-op program has really been searching for and making available to you both of those kinds of opportunities. And finally, research. I chose photos to exemplify kind of the before times of students. These are actually students all in the same laser lab in biophysics at my institution, when they need to be in person, using the equipment, collaborating with each other. That became much more complicated during this last year. But it didn't have to stop. It stopped for a while until we figured it out. And there are endless examples of this. This is this lab. Outside of the lab, in the classroom that's attached, that door there goes into the lab space, the laser lab space. But these students are in what's called a high flex research classroom. So these are students who are living on campus, and they are in the classroom space. They're wearing face masks, and each of them has a camera and a connection through the computer to their collaborating students who are working in their own homes, who are not on campus. And they're collaborating and producing research using the technology in innovative ways. The other ways that research is opening up opportunities is that we need research on COVID. And not just, I don't mean just like to develop further vaccines. I mean everything related. We need business research on distributing vaccines. We need mathematical modeling of how it's spreading into certain communities. And if you change a variable, what happens? We need K through 12 teachers to be learning how to adapt their curricula and their ways of teaching, their pedagogies for remote learning. But also because of all the other context of our world, we need people who can study issues related to racial equity and justice. I put an example in here of a student I know doing summer research on the rhetorical framing of the Black Lives Matter movement and how that movement can advance the cause through the ways in which it makes the argument. And then I have students working on, especially in the social sciences, working on the notion of calling in versus calling out in issues of partisan division, rather than calling each other out as like, you're out of touch, you're uninformed, you're racist, you're whatever, all the kinds of things that put up the barriers and the defenses. How can we bridge some of this divide through calling people in a more productive way? So these are just a few examples of the ways in which we need you to do research to solve and address these problems that we have in every field. What makes these experiential learning opportunities so powerful are four main components that are shared by all of them. One is you get great mentoring, whether that's from the faculty mentor doing your research that you're doing your research with, the supervisor at your internship, the professor who's teaching the class. You form relationships with people who are bringing you into a professionalism and a set of knowledge and dispositions to do that work in the future. All of these opportunities allow you to do original, meaningful, inquiry-based work. In other words, you can demonstrate your curiosity by asking the questions that only you can ask because you're coming from your unique perspective and set of experiences, and we need all of it. This photo up at the top right, the student who's on the right, Melvin Caballero, is presenting his research pre-pandemic about unaccompanied minors crossing into the US. Melvin himself was an unaccompanied minor. He was 16 years old when he left Honduras, his home country, and traveled across the Rio Grande, was arrested in Texas. Long story. Now he's a US citizen doing research on why children, teens leave and come to the US, why their parents very often are making that decision to send them. And we need to understand this issue. This is a huge issue, especially right now. And so it's just an example of the way in which your own expertise can help advance our understanding. While you do this work, you're learning the methods and the tools of the field. You're learning the research measurement tools. You're learning the professionalism as you're going into an internship or co-op. You're learning cross-cultural communication in your global engagement. And finally, we know there's a great deal of power in sharing the work that you've done, disseminating it, circulating it. It can be in a formal way, like a campus symposium presentation or a conference presentation, but also if you're giving a report, like say through the Mayerson projects, you're going to be giving feedback to those nonprofits that you've done research on. If you're going to be doing an internship or a co-op, you're going to be asked to provide some feedback or report on your experience. And those are all contributing to your own confidence and expertise in the field, because that's what scholars and professionals do. We don't just keep the knowledge to ourselves, but that we're sharing it in order to advance our understanding and to ask questions and dialogue about it. So more than ever, we need your participation in these fields, both to advance our globalized economy, but also for your own edification, for your own career advancement. More than ever, these skills that the employers are looking for, these traits that the employers are looking for, they're going to continue to be highly valued, and you can demonstrate them through your participation in experiential learning. I'm going to stop there and let's talk. Let's see what kinds of questions you have.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So one of the questions we have is about online students. So we have a number of students at NKU who are already online or consistently online. It's not a switch during the pandemic. How did they connect, or how do they figure out how to connect with mentors on campus?
That is, I know that Dr. Reilly knows this too, because of her work with undergraduate researchers. That's always been this tremendous challenge. And it's another one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that we're forced to figure this out. And so it's going to benefit those that we left inadvertently, but we did leave behind in the past. And not that that's not a danger anymore, but all of your professors and your staff who are there to support you are much more adept than ever before with remote learning. And so that's still the best ways, I think, are to learn about the kinds of, so let's talk about research first for a moment. Learn about the kinds of research that the professors in your department are doing. Most department websites, web pages will have some information about their faculty research. If there's a particular group or professor you'd like to be part of, reach out, send them an email. People are generally very happy to hear about those who are interested. And as much as you can provide, like, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction when I write to somebody like that, not just like, how do I get involved with research, but I was reading that you do research with family systems therapy. That's something that I'm really interested in. Do you ever collaborate with students in research? If so, is there a way that I could be considered for that? Some departments, especially those in the lab sciences, and in my experience also psychology, will have a kind of structured way for students to get involved. And so that may be asking your advisor, what is it? How do I do this? And really making clear to everyone with whom you do have those conversations, even through email, this is something I want to do. And also you can go to Dr. Reilly's office, right? Contact you for a meeting, or do you, I don't know if you do any, like info workshops online that people can just, get that info.
What about an internship or something, study abroad? How do we cross that gap for those students?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did see on the internship and co-op webpage this direct explanation that that they're working with companies for remote internships. And I realized that a student who's online for classes still might be able to do an in-person internship. They're online for classes for lots of different reasons. So whether you are up for an in-person or for a remote, make sure that you do connect with that office. I believe there's a database, is that right, of offerings to be able to look at what's there. The study abroad, I mean, I don't know what's happening with study abroad anyway, but again, unfortunately, it requires more from that online student of those outreaches. One thing that I've found, this is anecdotal, but makes a difference for me, is that I get a lot of emails from students with an inquiry, and they seem to want a response by email. And I've gotten more direct about saying, would you be willing to have a video meeting with me? And I know that video meetings can be awkward or feel like, especially if it's someone you've never met before. I understand. It's also, if you can just like say, okay, it's awkward, I'm just going to do it. I think that it makes a difference. I can connect better. We just are We're such social beings. And if I can actually talk, or if it's just on the phone, that's fine. But if we can actually talk and I can kind of get to know you a little bit better, I can connect you much better. So please don't shy away from those. And you might even say in an email, would it be possible to have a video meeting with you? I would try that.
Thank you. Our next question is about when. So when can
Mm.
students do experiential learning? Do they need to be freshmen? Is there a too late time? All of that.
Yeah, and and I don't know if you have any colleagues who want to help out with this too. What we know from the national data are that early and frequent are ideal. So if from your first semester, I mean, I don't think any of you are in your first semester now, but in your first year here, heading into second year, you look for those opportunities. You both look for them and express interest in them, or you seek them out as early as possible. But don't conclude um, like that's too advanced for me. Um, you can say, I am a second year student. I know I'm just a beginner in this. Or you might say if you've taken any courses that are related. So if it's research, have you taken the statistics course or the research methods course or something that will help to demonstrate at what level you are for research. But there are now, um, there are fewer, but there are internships that want first and second year students because they're hoping that you'll come back maybe that summer, and ultimately that you could come back and get hired from them for by them. And I've seen that a few times with students who are second year students who went back again. Okay, on the other hand, don't conclude it's too late. I mean, if you're graduating in May, it's too late to start something. I didn't need to tell you that. But if you're graduating in December, say, or certainly next May, there is plenty of time. And say, we know that if students can have a mixture of experiential learning, that's phenomenal, right? You don't have to do it all. What is best aligned with your values and your talents and your goal? So I was struck by that conversation with Jennifer Toyo. Undergraduate research, which she did at NKU, is aligned with her goal of being a biomedical researcher. And she first thought she was going to go to medical school, so also aligned with that initial goal. But doing community service now as an AmeriCorps volunteer is out of her passion, and her desire to give back to her community. Those are both really good reasons to do either one of those things. So whether it's because what you're going to be able to demonstrate um, is going to be much stronger and at a high level if you loved it, if your heart was in it and you gave it the attention and the best of your talents, because you cared. They don't care that it wasn't particularly aligned with exactly what their company or organization does. It demonstrates, as I was pointing out, and they pointed out in the survey, this whole range of skills and traits that you might not even see, but that you're developing by doing that thing. So early as you can.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Our next question looks at sort of the variety of opportunities. So the student is not a STEM student or not in the sciences, but a lot of the discussion about research or even
Mhm.
some of the other programs are about science
Mhm.
programs. So I wondered if you could talk about opportunities that exist sort of across disciplines.
Yes, as a humanities professor, I totally feel you. I first thought I would never be able to get a job in undergraduate research because I wasn't in the right field for that. But then I recognized that not being in the right field for it actually helped me think creatively with students across the disciplines. So, in terms of research, yeah, what we think of immediately, especially because of the word, is that we think of laboratories, um, and that's great, or field work perhaps, and that's great. But really, we need to broaden that understanding to the kinds of discovery work and creation that happens in any discipline. So when I say creation, I mean like in the arts, you wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm starting with a hypothesis or a research question," but you're starting with a goal to create something, make something new, whether that's composing a piece of music or dance or a sculpture. But in the humanities, in the social sciences, education, business, professional fields, we're doing a lot of discovery of best practices. So you'll get most of your opportunities in your courses. Sometimes those will be explicit, like your department might offer courses that are designated as research courses. They're called research methods, or they are known to be a heavy research course. A lot of folks, especially if they're not inclined toward the laboratory, run, scared from that word. The R word sounds really intimidating, because it's not like what you experienced in high school when people said research. A lot of my students have said, "Oh, what that means is a big long paper and a bibliography that I probably screwed up." Like it's all like the workload of the product. But what you're wanting is to learn the skills of discovery in your field. And that's what you can do through coursework. So when you have opportunities for assignments that are fairly open-ended, to talk with your professor about, or your grad assistant, if that's relevant, about some of the ideas you have. That is something I did as a first-year student. I got into doing research by pursuing a question that was really of interest to me in an English course. And I found that so thrilling to get to discover something that I really cared about. Outside of class is where those opportunities narrow a bit, because they're costly outside of classes. But you have a summer program, you have some opportunities to do research that's outside of the sciences that I know, I don't know if you want to speak to it at all here, Dr. Reilly, but um, even the name of your program is inclusive. It's not just research, but the scholarship and the creative activity. Do you typically have a pathway for students not in the sciences that you recommend?
A pathway?
Or just, yeah,
Uh,
I don't know, just more NKU specific advice if there is any.
so typically we like to connect students with mentors who do whatever they're looking to do. So if it's more in the humanities, if it's in the social sciences, connecting them with a faculty member to help them is where we're going to really tie that in, and then hope that they work on a product together or a project together. We've certainly had students from theater and other areas be successful with summer fellowships through our office. And one is doing extraordinarily well. He's now going to have a play highlighted at the Ensemble Theater here in Cincinnati. So we're really excited from his first play to where he's gotten. So we do have students beyond our sciences that do engage in research and creative activity through our office. Thanks.
Yeah, I think if you think in terms of, yeah, what do the scholars, your professors in those fields, what are the kinds of things they do? So theater professors sometimes are playwrights, or they're set designers. So the kinds of work they would do would be the kind of work you would do just at an undergrad level, or what we often refer to as like an apprentice level, like you're learning it from the expert. And so you wouldn't necessarily call it research in theater, but that is getting at those same aims um, that the employers are looking for, that grad schools are looking for, because you're learning to ask questions that don't have a fixed answer, or you're taking on a very complex set of a project if you're going to write a play or compose something. that shows a lot about your work ethic, your curiosity, your ability to stick with something that doesn't just like have a clear, easy, neat ending. So in the humanities, one thing that has opened up opportunities quite a bit is called the digital humanities. And that is just referring to all the kinds of projects, if you will, that are online that require collaboration. So timelines and building websites and web resources. I have a colleague in art history whose students design lectures for the website smarthistory.org, which is a resource for high school teachers. So they create materials for that. It's a digital humanities project. So ask your professors, especially if you already have a relationship with someone, if they're doing any kind of work that you might be able to help with. There's on In terms of student research, there's like the side where the professor is recruiting students or welcoming students in to work with them. But what often happens outside of the sciences, or more often outside the sciences, is students can sometimes give professors ideas about how to work with students. Because those of us not in the sciences who are professors now, we didn't grow up in our undergrad experience doing research with professors for the most part. That's new. So we sometimes don't know how to wrap our heads around it until a student we really like says, I would love to work with you. I had a student who wanted to work with me years ago on a novel that we were reading in the class. And I happened to say in the class that I was working on an article on that novel. And she came to talk to me and she was like, could I help you with that? And I was like, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of that before. It was before I was involved in undergraduate research. So some of this takes some courage, because the worst thing that they could say is like, I just don't really see it right now. But hey, you might be so glad that you asked.
Thank you.
Sure.
And our final question, we're almost out of time, is looking at how students can engage some of the social justice passions that they have right now into community engagement, into their internships to better the community through sort of these opportunities. And since that seems to be
Yeah.
a passion for you, this seems like a good question to.
Yeah. I'm so glad for that. I think this happens in at least two big ways. One is the obvious, maybe more obvious, which is in terms of the topics. So you might have opportunities in your courses, say next semester, where you'll be have some freedom in terms of what you decide to focus on, maybe on a group project or an individual research like assignment, where you might be able to connect it to a matter of justice that you care about. Um, that's that's one way. Many professors, I just did a survey of faculty at my institution. Many professors are shifting some of their research to focus more on racial equity and justice, especially in the social sciences who have a little more flexibility there. So you might even find opportunities that wasn't their main focus recently, but now it is. And in terms of community engagement, service learning, that is exactly um, where to work for justice. Even if it's an organization that doesn't, the mission of the organization isn't necessarily racial equity, say, but that is your passion. I firmly believe that all matters of justice are connected. When we make the world more just for people of color, we're making it more just for all of us. When we make the world more just for people with disabilities, we're making it more just for people who don't have disabilities. Like it's all connected. So if you're able to connect with a nonprofit or an opportunity to advance something, you're part of the cause. So there's the topic side, but there's also the ways in which we do the work that can be more just. So there's a recent article that I love called it's something like 10 ways to build an anti-racist lab. And it's written by these biochemists who are talking about an environment of collaboration that honors each person, and that seeks to make sure that they are, um, not having inadvertent white supremacist ideas. Like, it's not just the white males in the lab who are getting the say, but they're really creating space for, let's make sure that people of color, their voice is being heard. Let's make sure that women are being heard here in these spaces that have been male dominated. But the kinds of work you do can be infused with your own commitment to justice. So for those of us who are white, it often means stepping out of the way, being quiet more often, and inviting others to speak who may not have felt like they had a welcome space to do that before. And as the awareness grows among white people in this country, maybe more of us are creating a little bit more silence, or quieting ourselves a little bit and listening better. So there's the whole approach. I had a student who is a biology researcher, and she said, I'm really committed to anti-racism, but this lab doesn't do something related to that. And I was like, but it does. Everything we do can be infused with justice. Every time we are affirming the dignity of each other person. And read stuff. There's so many great resources out there about how you might change mindset, how you might change your own behavior so that you're actually creating this better world no matter what you're doing. Call me idealist, but that's that's what I believe.
And I think that's a fantastic place to end for today, right? Positive note, you can change the world through experiential learning.
That's right. Absolutely. Dr. Reilly and I and so many of your faculty and staff have dedicated our careers to this for a reason. And that's because we have seen this change your lives, and we are 100% behind you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you'll have the opportunity to attend other events this week. There are plenty if you want to go to our website at www.nku.edu/ELW, as you can see on the screen. Thank you all for coming today, and we hope to see you later this week.
Thanks all.